Hi, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a file browser for Android using Ionic Framework. So if you're unfamiliar with what a file browser might be, essentially we are going to show how to show all files and directories at the root of the device or simulator, and then be able to traverse further into the file system. So if you click on a directory at the root of the file system, it'll then show all contents of the directory that you clicked. So just a browser type utility. And it's pretty useful when it comes to kind of finding stuff on your device. It helps familiarize yourself with the Apache Cordova File plugin. Just little things like that. And it's been a popular request by people who have been following me on Twitter. So to start things off, let's go ahead and create a fresh Ionic Framework project right on our desktop. So Ionic start, let's call it File Browser App, and we'll use the blank template. Alright, so now let's go ahead and navigate into that new directory that we just created. And now we're going to go ahead and add the Android platform. Alright, perfect. So in order to access the file system in any kind of hybrid application, we're going to need permission. And permission comes in the form of an Apache Cordova plugin, which is the file plugin, and that could be installed like the following. Just take a minute here to install. Alright, perfect. So we just installed the plugin. So the rest of this tutorial is going to be broken up into, say, 3 parts. We're going to create a AngularJS file factory, which will kind of be responsible for finding all the contents of a certain path, as well as finding the contents at the root, and then finding the parent directory of any current directory. So let's go ahead and inside of our editor, let's go ahead and open up the new project that we just created. Alright. So inside that project, go ahead and open up your www and then your JS and then app.js file. And we're going to leave pretty much all of this how it is. It's not necessary to change. So let's go ahead and start by adding the factory. So we're going to say .factory, and we're going to call it file factory. You can call it whatever you want, but this is easy to remember. We're going to include Q because we're going to be using promises. Alright, perfect. And there's going to be a ton of different ways to do this. Mine may not be the best way, but it is a way that works and kind of demonstrates how to use the file APIs. So let's go ahead and do the following. We're going to say var file equals function, and it's just going to be empty. And then we're going to make a prototype for file. Before we start adding the contents of the prototype, let's go ahead and say return file, because that's going to be our end result here. So going back into the file prototype, let's go ahead and start by creating a function that will get the parent directory of any given path. So we're going to say get parent directory function path. We're going to set up our promise. Window.resolve local file system we're going to use that path that we're going to pass into the function, and it has a callback that we're going to use. So when it has, when the success callback happens, we're then going to make use of the directory entry get parent. So file system dot get parent, and again there's another callback that goes with this. And if it's successful, we're going to say deferred dot resolve, and we're going to pass in the result. Otherwise, it wasn't successful, so we're going to return the error. We're going to reject it. So we can also attach a error callback to this. We're going to say deferred.reject error. Add a semicolon there. And then finally, what we can do is we can do return deferred promise. So that tells us that we're going to return a promise here. So again, just to rehash on this particular function, we're accessing the local file system at a given path. When we access that path, we're then going to find the parent of that path and return it. And it's a directory entry that's returned. So let's go ahead and look at the next two functions that we're going to make. And they're very similar, so I'm going to be recycling a lot of the code. So let's say get entries at root. That's going to be our next function. So this is going to get the base of the file system. So again, we're going to say var deferred. We're going to end it here with a return deferred promise, so that way we don't forget. And then we're going to start coding here. So we're going to say window.request file system, and then we're going to pass in the local file system constant here, persistent. We're going to handle the callback. Alright, so inside the callback, what we want to do is we want to set up a new directory reader. We want to read the contents of the directory that was returned. So directory reader. And with that, we can access a function called read entries. So directory reader dot read entries, and that will it will also have a callback here. Entries. Alright, and this is where the magic happens here. So we're going to go ahead and return all of the entries. So deferred.resolve, because it was successful. Alright, and then if there was an error, we're going to reject it. And then likewise, if there was an error down here, we could also reject it. Perfect. So again, just to reiterate on what the get entry that root function will do, is we will access the local file system at the root, and we will return all directories and files. So the final function that we're going to make inside of this factory is just to get any entries at a desired path, a path that the user defines. So let's go ahead and say get entries, and we're going to accept a string for a path. Again, we're going to say var deferred. We're going to prepare to return a promise, because remember, all of this is asynchronous, so you've got to prepare to know that it's not going to be instant. You gotta wait for it to be returned. So this time we're going to say window.resolve local file system URI. URI. So this is going to be similar to the get parent directory. We're going to pass in a path, and then again, like we saw above, we're going to pass in a success callback that's going to have a file system result. We're going to go ahead and at this point we can go ahead and copy what we have inside of the get entries at root. So we're going to change it a little bit though. So go ahead and copy and paste it. This time instead of root, we're just going to say filesystem.createReader. That's pretty much the only difference here. We're going to again have an error callback here, so function error. Alright, perfect. So instead of getting it at the root of the file system, we're going to pass in a path, and we're going to return all entries at that path, and that includes directories as well as files. So moving along, we just created our factory that will handle all of our file stuff. The next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and open up our index.html file. And inside here, you'll notice the ion content tags. That's where we're going to do all of our business. So inside that content, we're going to go ahead and reference a controller that we haven't yet created, which is fine. We're going to call it example controller. And inside example controller, we're going to go ahead and create a list, an Ionic list. So div class equals list. And we are going to now repeat our items. So we're going to say div ng repeat. And again, we're going to be referencing variables that we've not yet created, but we will in the next step. Alright, so we're going to repeat all of the files, and files means directories as well as files. And we are going to populate list items. So a class equals item. And there's going to be an icon on this, so we're going to say item icon left. href equals pound symbol, ng click, and then this is going to be a function that, again, we're going to create in the next step. So get contents, and we're going to pass in the file.native URL. So I'll explain more on this in the next step, but the native URL is actually a property that gets returned from our factory. So it's something that the factory has already decided for us. So let's go ahead and close the tag to our link. And this, we're going to do kind of like an if statement, because if it's a file, we want to show kind of like a document icon, and if it's a directory, we kind of want to show a folder icon. So let's see how that would happen. ing show. So if file.isDirectory, so that way we're going to say class equals icon ion folder. And then we're going to say ing show equals, so in this case we're going to say if it's a file, not a directory. So file.isFile, and in which case the class will be an icon, and it will be ion document, just to kind of fancy it up. All right. So finally, we're gonna show the file name. So file.name, and again, these are all properties of the file that is returned from the factory that we created. So we have our whole UI created. It's very simple in this example. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go back into the app.js, and we are going to start creating our example controller. So I'm going to go ahead and do that above the factory. And just, yeah, so I have a semicolon on that. So let's say dot controller, example controller, and we're going to reference the scope, Ionic platform, as well as our file factory. All right. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and initialize that file factory. So we can say fs equals new file factory. So since we're using native device code, it won't immediately be ready when the device loads. So what we need to do is we need to place it inside of an Apache Cordova device ready or Ionic platform ready function. We're going to go ahead and use that Ionic platform.ready. So if this function gets hit in the callback, that means that it's ready to go, ready for use. So that's where we're going to do all of our coding here. So let's go ahead and say fs.get entries at root. So remember, get entries at root is what we created, and then we're going to work with the promise. So we're doing this right as soon as the device is ready because we immediately want to show all files and folders. We're not going to waste any time here. So in this case, we're going to say scope.files equals result. And then if there's an error, we can say console.error and then error. Just like that. So we're loading all the contents at the root, and then we're also going to create that function called getContents. So let's go ahead and check that out. So we're going to say fs.getEntries. We're going to pass in the path, and then we are going to work with our success. Before we start working with the success, let's go ahead and make the error. We're going to say console.error and then just pass in the error. Alright, so in the success, what we want to do is we want to say scope.files equals result. So we're going to store all of the result there. We're also going to take it one step further here. We're going to create a kind of dummy reference at the first index. We're going to say scope.files unshift. Unshift command will put it at the first index. I'm going to say name, and then we're going to say parent. And we're doing this because we're creating a way to traverse backwards. So that way you don't just navigate 3 layers in and then are stuck. We want to be able to go backwards in the list. So after we've created this kind of dummy element, we need to go ahead and work with it. So we're going to say file system get parent directory. We're going to pass in the path. And then what this is going to do is we're going to get the parent of the current path. So it's function result. We're not going to worry about messing with the error callback. You can go ahead and add it if you want. Let's just ignore it for now though. And we're going to say result.name equals parent, and we're going to say scope.files 0 because remember we used unshift, so it's currently at the 0 index, and we're going to say result because we're only expecting one result. Alright, at this point in time, let's go ahead and test it. Hopefully everything is working out correctly. So in your terminal, go ahead and do Ionic build Android. I do not recommend trying to test this in a web browser. It will not work because you are using native device plugins, which cannot be used in web browsers. So we've just built it for Android. Let's go ahead and install it. So we're going to do adb install R, and main activity debug apk. Alright, it installed successfully, so let's go ahead and open up our simulator. Let's go ahead and open it here. Alright, so there was a problem. Let's go ahead and open up our ADB logs and see why this problem exists. Alright, it might be easier if I just exit out and then reopen the app. Alright, so we have a problem. Module starter is not available. So let's see, we named it starter, go to index, starter is still valid. So my assumption here is I have a typo that would be preventing us. So let's go ahead and go back into our code here. Yeah, so I added a semicolon here, which was bad. So let's go ahead and try to rebuild it. I think that will probably resolve our issue. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at our simulator again. Hopefully it worked out. Yeah, it did. So that was the issue. I had a semicolon. We only want a semicolon at the end of the factory. We don't want it in the middle. So looking at our simulator here, you can see that we have all of the directories at the root of our simulator here. So when we go ahead and click one, so I just clicked on Android, and there's another directory in there called data. I'm going to click it, and it's showing the contents. See, .no media, even though it's probably a hidden file, it's still a file, so it has a file icon. Let's go ahead and we can navigate deeper if we want, files, and then we can click parent and it'll take us back. So just like that, you saw how to create a file browser with Ionic Framework. And this tutorial should work with iOS as well, because as far as the Apache Cordova documentation goes for the file plugin, everything is cross-compatible, so there shouldn't be any issues. But for simplicity, that's why I've only chosen to do Android.